The Holy Grail is a prize sought by kings, knights, and adventurers. And yet every failed search only adds to the legend.
I think the significance of the Grail is in the fact that it is a heritage. It's something which goes back 2,000 years, something which could have been passed on virtually from generation to generation. The greatest vision quest of history is that of the Holy Grail.
While legends of the Grail are numerous, they all have a common beginning. And that beginning is an evening 2,000 years ago in the heart of the Middle East. The story is well known to Christians around the world. On the evening before his crucifixion, Jesus gathered 12 of his disciples together. Taking a cup filled with wine, he offered it up, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood, the blood of the covenant."
The Holy Grail is generally considered to be a cup or a chalice. A cup that perhaps that Jesus used at the Last Supper, or that caught his blood as he hung on the cross.
Some believe a disciple named Joseph of Arimathea took the Grail and traveled to Europe, eventually reaching Britain. Another tradition focuses on Mary Magdalene. Also traveling west, it's claimed she settled in France. This is the city of Carcassonne in southern France. With its long history, it's a popular tourist destination. But just a few miles away, one finds the area's best-kept secret, the mysterious village of Rennes-le-Château.
The belief that Mary Magdalene came to France is actually very old, and in fact you'll find many towns in southern France that basically are dedicated to her as a saint.
The church in Rennes-le-Château is no exception. In one arm, Mary bears the cross. In the other, the symbol of the Holy Grail.
There are references going all the way back to medieval times of some kind of treasure located in the vicinity of Rennes-le-Château. There's something going on in the whole of that area. There are various churches and buildings which have very interesting symbols and clues which people see as an integral part of a much bigger mystery.
But what draws attention to this sleepy village? The answer lies in the secret life of this man, pictured here on his deathbed in 1917. His story has reopened an ancient mystery. The legend goes as follows. In 1885, a priest named Berenger Saunier arrives in Rennes-le-Château.
Here he was, a poor parish priest in a tiny, lost, remote village. And when he arrived here, penniless, the church was crumbling away. It was 1,000 years and more old. And he needed to have the place repaired. So in doing those essential repairs, he decided to lift the altar stone, which was cracked and crumbling away. He discovered that one of the two pillars on which it was supported was hollow, and in the hollow pillar he found these famous parchments.
On the surface, the parchments contain simple verses from the Bible written in Latin. Yet somehow, almost overnight, they transform his life.
It was quite clear that something quite profound had happened to him.
Saunier travels to Paris and meets with members of various secret societies. He's seen digging in the graveyard at night. Most notably, he starts spending money.
Basically, he amassed a great deal of wealth. You know, he was a small village priest, and yet he spent quite lavish sums on refurbishing many of the structures in the village.
Perhaps the parchments were valuable in their own right, or perhaps Saunier had discovered something else.
It's possible he may have actually discovered some actual artifacts underneath his church, and he sold them and made his money that way.
Rumors of the Holy Grail were widespread, but Saunier refused to reveal the source of his wealth. He died in 1917, but the puzzling story of his life lived on. Most mysteriously, in these parchments, claimed to be the actual replicas of the ones Saunier found inside the church pillar.
The original parchments that Saunier discovered have never been seen. What most people are going from when you see images of the parchments are reproductions of photos of what were claimed to be parchments.
Henry Lincoln is the co-author of the cult classic book Holy Blood, Holy Grail. He's been studying the mystery of Rennes-le-Château for 30 years. He originally took the legend of Saunier to be just that, a legend. But it was the copies of the parchments and what they concealed that drew him deeper into the mystery than he ever could have imagined. Deceptively simple, closer inspection reveals a series of ciphers or hidden codes.
All these are broken lines until we get down to the bottom where there are 4 lines all lined up. And we have the letters S-I-O-N, which are, of course, meaningful. Zion is Jerusalem. Now, when we come to this one, we have a neat block of text and what appears to be an untidy arrow with an indicator, perhaps N for north, and the letters N-O-I-S, which are meaningless, but we've just seen the words S-I-O-N in the other parchment. Simply, they've been turned upside down. For some reason, whoever wrote this parchment wants us to turn it upside down.
References to Sion could speak of an ancient link with Jerusalem. Before long, Henry Lincoln found repeated mention of a distinguished bloodline. Pondering this, he ventured a controversial hypothesis that went right back to the heart of the Middle East.
When the Grail first appears in literature, it isn't referred to as the Holy Grail. Its first reference is one simple word, Sangral, which is spelled S-A-N-G-R-A-A-L, Sangral. I wondered if we perhaps divided it in the wrong place. It's not San Graal, but San Graal, and that now means royal blood. The legend has it that Mary Magdalene came into France bearing with her the cross and the Grail. And in terms of my hypothesis, of course, she came bearing the bloodline. It was her womb, in fact, was the Grail that bore the holy blood of Jesus.
You know, the 4 Gospels that we have in the New Testament, there's no suggestion of any actual relationship between her and Jesus other than a disciple relationship. Some of the Gnostic Gospels, on the other hand, do suggest that there was some type of romantic or marital relationship between her and Jesus.
If Mary Magdalene carried a child fathered by Jesus, their descendants might secretly walk among us to this day. It's an incredible theory, yet difficult to verify. When we return, Henry Lincoln's research leads to the most curious discovery ever made at Rennes-le-Château, and this time, he claims to have evidence. Each year, the French village of Rennes-le-Château draws visitors interested in lost treasures and legends of the Holy Grail. For Henry Lincoln, the answer to the local mystery lies in these parchments. Covered in biblical passages, they were apparently found by the village priest 100 years ago.
Some people say that those parchments are fakes concocted in the 1950s. Again, it doesn't matter whether they are modern fakes or ancient documents. What matters is the content.
Studying their hidden messages leads to a discovery that, if proven, transforms the way we look at Rennes-le-Château.
This parchment is particularly significant in that it's the one which conceals the geometric design on which the writing has been overlaid. And that geometric design was a pentacle, a five-pointed star.
The pentacle has long been a symbol of truth, health, and eternity. It is also associated with the occult and secret knowledge. Looking for more clues, Henry turns to the landscape around the village of Rennes-le-Château.
I thought, how do I find a pentagon in a landscape? I thought about it for a while and realized that a pentagon is made up of 5 overlapping triangles. Maybe a triangle would be easier to find. There's the castle at Rennes-le-Château. There's one at Blanchefort, and there is the Templar Commandery at Bézieux. I marked them on the map, and there it was, the internal angles of a pentagon. I thought in order to complete the pattern I should mark in the other 2 locations. So I measured them on the map, and to my total amazement, I find they were already marked on the map by spot heights on the end of a mountain called the Serre de Lauzet, and over here on a mountain called La Soulane. I had 5 natural mountain peaks which formed a perfect pentagon in the landscape. The odds against discovering such an incredibly accurate geometric phenomenon in a configuration of natural mountains must be absolutely astronomical. There was a pentagon. This was a holy place.
A lot of the problematic nature of some of this is if you're drawing lines on a map and you're particularly careless about it, you can find patterns anywhere. Now, whether they're really there on the ground or it's just in your imagination is always a debatable question.
Those who say, I choose the places to fit the geometry and ignore the places which don't fit, are merely indulging in wishful thinking. I didn't set out to find this. It presented itself to me.
If the pentacles are truly the key to the mystery of Rennes-le-Château, legend would suggest that a humble village priest somehow turned this secret into wealth.
Essentially what we're dealing with is a body of knowledge which was accessible to our ancestors at a time, at least 1,000 years ago, when we didn't think that they possessed such knowledge. This was apparently handed down over the centuries as secret knowledge from generation to generation.
My own personal opinion is there are a lot of things in here that are clearly fabrications, but I think once you look past them and you look at the larger tapestry of things, there's too many collateral mysteries and puzzles that are not solved by simply saying it's all a hoax. Whatever is the ultimate treasure of Rennes-le-Château, I think that it's not a physical treasure. It probably is something of some spiritual or historical significance. What exactly it is, I don't know.
Some believe it is the Holy Grail itself. In southern France, Grail legend centers on Mary Magdalene. But a separate branch of this great mystery follows another key character from the life of Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea. Many claim it was he who safeguarded the Holy Cup, taking it not to France, but rather north to the island of Britain. Situated in the beautiful county of Somerset, England, just a few hours west of London, one finds the ancient market town of Glastonbury. Each year, intrigued by its romantic history, tourists flock to the nearby ruins of one of the world's oldest churches. According to legend, Joseph of Arimathea arrived at this exact location with the Holy Grail. The manicured grounds at Glastonbury Abbey provide another important link in the mystery, for here one also finds the reputed burial spot of the most famous Grail hunter of all time, King Arthur. Almost 1,000 years ago, a series of fantastic tales appeared in Europe, recounting the adventures of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. Based in legendary Camelot, the knights were both seekers and protectors of the Holy Grail.
The knights of the Round Table in Arthurian times were supposed to be spending a lot of time trying to discover where it was and recover it. That's one story. But the other story is that the Holy Grail is something spiritual and not tangible.
I think everybody likes myths and legends. It's partly the mystical element, that we don't know everything. Arthur is the great folk hero. So there is a sort of almost a wish for there to have been an Arthur, even if he hadn't actually existed. And that's the big question. If he didn't exist, somebody like him certainly did.
Graham Phillips is the best-selling author of the book, The Search for the Grail. He's a frequent lecturer on history's unsolved mysteries.
Of course, the stories of King Arthur slaying dragons and damsels in distress are obviously made up. But there is, it seems, an historical figure upon whom these legends were based. What I find fascinating is very often you will find that behind certainly the medieval romances, that there was a grain of truth.
When we return, Graham Phillips uncovers a secret cup in a remote part of England. According to him, it's the cup that inspired the legend of the Holy Grail. In England, Graham Phillips is on the trail of King Arthur and the Holy Grail. His detective work takes us away from Glastonbury Abbey and northwards to the county of Shropshire. Situated on the border with Wales, Shropshire is the home to the ruins of Whittington Castle.
In the stories where Arthur's knights go searching for the Grail, they find it at somewhere called the White Castle. Now, Whittington Castle, that's actually the word Whittington means white town. And Whittington Castle was called the White Castle in all the early references to this in the Middle Ages.
Looking into the legends of Whittington, Graham Phillips researches a 900-year-old romance called Fulk le Fitzwarine, written around the same time as the King Arthur stories. In the legend, Fulk Fitzwarine is portrayed as a direct descendant of King Arthur, and therefore the rightful protector of the Grail. Fulk keeps the Grail hidden away in a small chapel. Then, on his deathbed, he gives specific instructions to his family that the precious cup be hidden somewhere else. This may simply be another legend, like those based on King Arthur, but there is one key difference. Unlike Arthur, whose existence is debatable, Fulk Fitzwarine was a definite historical character who lived right here in Whittington.
This family, the Fitzwarine family, continued to live at Whittington Castle throughout the Middle Ages, and this cup was supposedly passed down through members of the family.
Graham began tracing the family tree. 400 years after the time of Fitzwarine, the cup is mentioned in another story, this time in connection with a place called the White Abbey, a mere 6 miles from Whittington. The final reference comes in the form of a poem, published last century by a descendant of Fulk Fitzwarine named Thomas Wright.
This family continued to keep this cup in their possession until the last of them, around about 150 years ago, decided that he was going to hide it.
The poem speaks of the cup being moved from the White Abbey to the vicinity of the Red Castle. This is Hawkstone Park in Shropshire, home to the ruins of the historic Red Castle. The poem ends abruptly before the final hiding place is revealed. At the bottom of the page, however, a series of Roman numerals stands out as a possible clue. Puzzled, Graham turns to the Bible. There, in the book of Psalms, he finds a possible answer. For each Roman numeral in the poem, he selects the corresponding passage in Psalms. Incredibly, the results read like a specific set of directions.
And the first one said, "I lift up my eyes unto the hills," and the second one said, "Lead me to the rock which is higher than I." It was clearly leading us from one place to another.
Standing near the ruins of the Red Castle in Hawkstone Park, Graham begins to follow the clues.
There's only one place that you can lift up your eyes unto the hills, which is a huge great cliff, which is opposite you, known as the White Cliff.
From the White Cliff, Graham is directed into a series of caves. After making his way through the dark, he emerges into a valley. The clues lead him to the doors of this small church. Once inside, he reads the final passage in the sequence.
I turned my eyes to the right and I beheld, and right in front of me is a stained glass window, and it depicts the four gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And they are holding, as you would expect, the books, the gospels that they'd written. Except for one of the figures, the one who's supposed to represent St. John, is holding a chalice. I'm thinking, this is strange. Why is he holding a cup? He should be holding a book.
The answer lies in the figures portrayed above the gospel writers. A bull, a lion, an angel, and above St. John, the one holding the Grail, an eagle. The caves that Graham just navigated his way through once held 4 statues representing these 4 figures. Unfortunately, the statues were removed from the caves in 1920 by this man, Walter Langham. Yet according to a local newspaper article from that year, when Walter Langham moved the eagle statue, there was something inside. Remarkably, it was a small cup. There's only one course of action left. Graham tracks down the great-great-granddaughter of the man who last set eyes on the cup. Much to his surprise, she knows exactly what he's talking about, though she has little idea of its significance. In the attic, she looks through boxes of family keepsakes. Graham's anticipation is keen. A 2,000-year-old mystery hangs in the balance.
That's it.
That's it?
That's the one.
You sure that's it?
Yeah, that's definitely it. That's what my mother had.
Oh my God. That is incredible. That is remarkable.
Hoping to learn more about this particular cup's origin, Graham enlists the help of colleague Andrew Collins. They visit archaeologist Rosemary Arscott, a specialist in Roman pottery.
What sort of age would you put on that?
1st century AD.
So it's Roman then?
Oh, yes, and definitely.
It does date to the right time frame of the age of Christ. It is virtually impossible to place an exact date on it. All you can really go from is the style and the similarities with other artifacts.
Whether it could have been brought direct from the Middle East or whether it could have come via other areas. And again, that's something that is very difficult to determine. So I guess they're questions that one would like to know and probably would never know the answer to it.
What exact role this cup played in history is open for speculation.
It may or may not have had anything to do with Jesus, but it certainly, in my opinion, is the cup that inspired the romance of the Holy Grail.
Whether there's any truth in the story is anybody's guess. The problem is, of course, we don't even know if the Holy Grail ever existed to start with.
Perhaps we can never know for sure. The real answer may be lost in time. In the end, the quest's richest reward might simply be what it tells us about ourselves. It's a story we want to believe in.
We talk so often of people looking for the Holy Grail of whatever it is they're looking for. The important thing about the Grail is not the discovery of the Grail, but the quest itself.
Many people believe the Holy Grail is still out there, waiting to be discovered. If it exists, will we ever find it? And if we do, what can it teach us? What great secrets will it reveal?